Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. It is a production of the GRN. We come to you most Fridays, not every Friday, as we proved last week. We had a big event last Thursday here in the studio because we've got a new radio station out in Fort Worth, and Bishop Olson was here in our studio on Thursday. And so typically, I need to turn my computer off. I'm sorry. Typically, we get holy days of obligation off, and since Thursday was a holy day of obligation, but we were here for the blessing, we got Friday off, and so we weren't here last week. So sorry about that, but here we are. We're here now, and we are broadcasting on YouTube and Twitter, X, Facebook, TikTok. Anyways, Cecil Anderson is our producer, and so thank you to her for being our producer extraordinaire. And she's also in the cool place in our control room. And when she's on camera, you can see the lit up board behind her. It's really cool. We got good equipment here at the Guadalupe Radio Network. Okay, we bring you the best. Okay, good equipment. And so, how you doing, Cecil? Good to see you.
I am doing really well.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have that cool shot with that thing in the background?
I do have it. I didn't have my light on, so it looks a little less cool. I looked like I was like creeping in the dark. So now it's a little bit cooler looking. But yes, you can see all the fun equipment behind me.
All right. Well, thank you for being our producer. And just want to let you know the topic of this program, generally speaking, is some topic related to the Summa Theologica. We're going through the Summa sequentially. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. And also the name Back to the Father refers to the fact that I think if you were to summarize what the Summa Theologica about, it's really about our being created by God and then God drawing us back to Himself, and really our life being one journey back to God. And some people don't like that analogy so much. I kind of like it. And the irony of all that is that I have always struggled to have a relationship with God the Father. Maybe that's why I'm so interested in the Summa in the first place, to try to rectify that. But last weekend, my wife and I went to San Antonio to go to a Fullness of Truth conference, which was outstanding. Father Calloway and a number of other speakers were there. And on Saturday, they had a healing and adoration event. And my wife has been really great in trying to find the healing that I need, to try to whatever's blocking me from having a relationship with the Father, right? So I went to confession. We did the healing service, and then Father Ken Geraci was bringing Jesus around in the Blessed Sacrament. And oh my goodness, it was so powerful and so amazing. And I was just really got very emotional. And so I think there was some healing that went on. And so, after literally 10 years of teaching the Summa to high school kids and doing programs like this, and even going into a brick and mortar school last year and teaching the Summa on the history of philosophy, I think I'm finally starting to get it that this is all about a relationship with the Father. So I was so thankful for that conference and for my wife and for Jesus and Father Ken Geraci there. All right, so if you've kind of paid attention to what we've done the last couple months, we have been, as I mentioned, going right through the Summa, and the Summa begins with God, the Summa ends with God, the middle of the Summa is our journey from God back to God. And so we had a program about the 5 proofs for the existence of God, because if you can't establish that God exists in the first place, then what's the point in the rest of the Summa talking about God and our journey to Him, right? Now, St. Thomas Aquinas would say that we naturally can know that there's a God. We don't need supernatural revelation to prove that there's a God. We don't have to accept it only on faith. We can know rationally that there's a God. Unlike the Trinity, we can't know rationally that there's a Trinity. We have to receive that on faith. And so we also had a program on the attributes of God. And then I think most recently we did one on the Blessed Trinity. Was that the one? Do you remember, Cecil? Was that 2 weeks ago, the Blessed Trinity?
That is such a good question. Was that the Blessed Trinity?
I hope it was.
Really
was there something else after the Blessed Trinity? Or I
I
think
should know. It's what happens when we take a week off. We don't remember anything.
know.
I don't think the
been a
Trinity was
couple
the last
weeks,
one, but
yeah.
maybe it was.
Okay. All right. Well, if anybody out there remembers, which brings me to my next point. If you're out there, I know somebody very, very well who says, you know what, I watched the show, I just don't comment. She claims that she's not really able to figure out how to comment.
Are you claiming? Are you calling out your?
No, I'm not doing. No, I didn't call her out. You called her out.
I think it's.
I'm not talking about necessarily my mom. Maybe, but maybe not. Okay, but she does faithfully watch. But she's on an iPad, and I think it's hard on an iPad maybe to comment.
Yeah, it kind of gets confusing when you're on a device and figuring out how to comment.
Yeah. So, anyways, if you're watching, regardless of the where you are, let us know where you are if you feel like it. Who you are, where you are, what you are, why you are, and then comment as you feel so inclined during the course of this broadcast. Now, I have lately been doing like kind of top 10 type of things, so you can kind of follow it along, and it's kind of ordered rather than just kind of teaching randomly. And what we're going to do today is talk about the 10 most interesting questions in the Summa Theologia about creation. Because, as I mentioned on Keith's show last week, the Blessed Trinity has three persons, and you have the relationship between the Father and the Son, and the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, and it's all based on God's intellect and God's will. And there's so much intense love within the Blessed Trinity that in a sense it kind of like bursts forth creation. I mean, that's kind of a nice image that I think Saint Bonaventure has used before, is that, when love is so intense, it's almost like there's like an explosion of love. So you can imagine just this explosion of love, so to speak, and what we have as a result of that is creation. And so during the course of this show, we're going to talk about that creation. We're going to talk about the distinction of things. Why are there so many creatures? Why is there inequality? I know I've talked about this before, but it's been a while, and we always have new listeners that are popping in. And why is there evil? Is God the cause of evil? Okay, just right off the bat, what do you think the answer to that is? Do you think God is the cause of evil? Yes or no, Sissel?
Hello.
Light question
hello.
there.
Yeah, light question. No.
No? Okay.
No.
Well, you have to wait.
Okay, by the way, Holy Visual says hello from Canada.
Holy Visuals?
Yes, that is on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
So.
Oh, well, hello. Good. That's not our friend Alan Smith. That's somebody else.
I don't believe so. I don't think that's what his name of his Instagram is.
There's more than Alan Smith in Canada.
Hey.
He's not the only person. Okay.
I thought he was in. Is he in Canada?
Oh yeah.
Why did I think he was in Ohio? I don't. You know what? I'm gonna just stop talking. Sorry, Alan.
Okay. No, I know Alan's definitely in, I think Toronto or some city in Canada, but he's definitely
name goes by Veronica.
Okay. Oh, so she's definitely not Alan Smith. Okay. So anyways, welcome, Veronica. Glad you're watching. And so what I'm going to do, and it may not take the whole hour, but we're just going to take these one at a time, and I'm going to share with you 10 interesting questions that St. Thomas Aquinas asks about creation in the Summa Theologia. And Sissel has loaded up all the slides, and basically on the slides, all you're going to see is a question and then one picture. Okay, so one picture that kind of has something to do with the question that's being asked. I don't give you in these slides exactly where to find it in the Summa. If you really want to know, email me and I can let you know. But I didn't want to, ST1
Clog it with all the information.
Yeah, I'm trying to simplify. As I was on the Beatitudes with Jeff Scheffelbein and Paul and Nick, and they asked me a question about the Summa and why it's significant and what's important about it. And I was just watching that replay today, and I kind of went into an explanation of St. Thomas Aquinas and some of his influences, like Aristotle and some of the Muslim philosophers and Greeks and Jewish philosophers and things like that. And I thought it was just kind of a basic explanation. And then Paul Kolker, who's a really bright guy, he said something about well, if you guys want to go back and listen to that on half speed, maybe it'll make sense. And I was like, really? So was it that? I mean, Paul Kolker was studied in Rome.
He was in seminary.
He's like studied in Rome and seminary. And I'm not criticizing him. I'm just saying maybe I've taught this so many times and it what kind of makes sense to me, and that because I've taught it so many times, I say it too fast.
You're just you're very excited, and it doesn't always. Everyone's like 2 steps behind you is the thing.
Yeah. Well, I hope that that's not the case.
Joe Loney says this is his favorite GRN show.
Oh,
so
is that right? Oh my goodness,
I paid him to say
that's
that.
quite not. I don't think anybody has ever said that about
I
Back
don't
to the
think
Father.
so.
Although, didn't we have somebody call into a share-a-thon one time?
We did have someone call into a share-a-thon.
Dottie Brady, was that her name?
No, not.
Okay.
Although yes, but also I think it was Forrest. He used to comment quite a bit. But
And he doesn't even watch any longer.
He does not.
Okay,
so we are
that's
clearly
all right.
not his favorite anymore.
All right, so here we go. Question number 1. And these are numbered, so it should be very easy to keep track of. And whether primary matter is created by God. Okay, and I've got this picture of this dude, and he's scratching his head. And not that this dude or his scratching of his head have anything to do with primary matter. In a way it does, but I put that picture on there because primary matter is a really interesting concept, okay? And I'm going to explain it as best as I can. And I find the whole idea of primary matter to be utterly fascinating. Now, I always have to kind of pick on Sissel because she's the only person I can see. Joe's watching, but when Joe produces a show,
I can go grab Joe if you want. We don't have to. We can.
How about a cup of Joe? That'd be nice. Get ourselves a little more energized.
We should. We should have a cup of coffee with these.
So, Sissel, do you remember? Because I know we must have talked about this before, and no shame if you don't.
Okay.
But do you remember even hearing about primary matter? Have we talked about that? Do you know what it is?
I do definitely remember us talking about it for sure. Yes.
Does anybody out there, Joe Loney, Veronica, was that our Canadian friend's name? Okay, Veronica, and no shame, don't worry about it. Before I started reading the Summa, I didn't know what it was either, but I want to explain it, and I find this utterly fascinating. Okay, so the definition of primary matter, and by the way, the answer is yes. The primary matter is created by God, but what is primary matter? Now, you know what matter is, right? So, I've got in my hand here a plastic cap of a water bottle, and that's matter. Our bodies are made of matter. This paper is matter. So matter generally is, we're talking about physical things, right? The stuff that things are made of, right? So what's primary matter? Well, think about, do you have a tree in your front of your house?
I do.
Okay, one tree. Okay, think of that tree.
Got it.
Okay, how old do you think the tree is?
I'm not the greatest about knowing how long trees have been around, but I'm going to say like 15, 20 years.
Okay, so if you went back 50 years ago and you looked at that yard, probably no tree, right?
Right.
No tree. And now you got this big tree that's, 30 feet tall or whatever, okay? So that matter of that tree at one point didn't exist. Now it did. Now it does. Now you got this big tree with all this matter there, okay? Take us, for example. There was a time when we were like the little embryo. And we were almost microscopic, right? But we were ourselves. And then all of a sudden we grow to how big I am now and, however big we are. And like the matter that we have that's part of us, where'd it come from? Because at one point it didn't even exist. It kind of came out of nowhere. And so what St. Thomas Aquinas talks about, the definition of primary matter, okay? He says that which is in potency to substantial being. Okay, that's a...
Okay.
Okay. Put that on half speed.
Mm-hmm,
okay.
Yes. I don't think half speed was going to save us there. I think we're going to need a different explanation.
But you can imagine, like, at one point that tree didn't exist, and now it does, and it's got this matter. Like, well, where did that matter come from? Where did it come from? So St. Thomas Aquinas and the philosophers before him gave a name to it, and what it is, it's matter in potentiality. Like, it doesn't exist yet. So primary matter doesn't exist. It's something that's going to exist. It's going to combine with like a form and be something. But at this point, it doesn't exist yet. Okay, so let's say Sissel is going to have a baby one day. Okay, maybe she will. Okay, well that baby's
FYI, this is not a pregnancy announcement.
No. She's not even married.
I'm not
okay, she's not married. She doesn't even have a boyfriend. Okay, but let's just say
we didn't need to go that far.
Okay, that's too personal. But that baby's will have a body and legs and arms and all that kind of stuff. But right now, the matter of that baby is in potential. Okay, so that's primary matter. I find that to be pretty interesting. What do y'all think? Okay, I'm picking
Does
on.
that make sense?
Does that make sense? I think it does, right? Because it's kind of like ex nihilo, creating something out of nothing, where at one point it doesn't exist at all, and then it does exist. All right, so that's probably the most confusing one. Number 2, whether God is the final cause of all things. So have you all ever heard of Aristotle's 4 causes? Okay, and if you haven't heard of these, or maybe you've heard of them, but you don't have them committed to memory, you got to memorize these, okay? There's certain things you got to memorize. And so and it's not too tough. Okay, so you have the material cause is just kind of like what I was just talking about, like the physical stuff. You have the efficient cause, which is whoever makes something. You have a formal cause is what it is. And then the final cause is the purpose. Okay, so we could you can use it for anything. Like the breakfast you made this morning is going to have a material, an efficient, a formal, and a final cause. Okay, the job that you do has a material, formal, final, and cause. It has all the causes. So this was Aristotle's way of kind of explaining everything. And so the cool thing, though, is final cause, as I mentioned, is the purpose or the meaning of something. Okay, why? Why did I cook breakfast this morning for my son? Okay, because I love him. I wanted him to have food. Okay, but he's saying here, God is the final cause of everything. Okay, so he's the purpose of everything we do. So everything we do without exception is directed towards God. And that makes him the final cause of all things. So everything that he created, he basically created so that it would in some way come back to him. Hence the title of the show, Back to the Father. Okay, so that ties in very well to Back to the Father because everything is directed to God. And so what I would encourage you to do is to get that into your mind so that and the day in the daily life and every experience you have and maybe hunger pangs or your desire for sleep or your desire for friendship or what have you, make that connection that all of this is related to God ultimately, because everything that you do with purpose, everything you do with intention, everything that you do that has a final cause ultimately is moving you towards God, because everything that you want to do is good. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to do it. And God is goodness itself. Okay. Is that easier than prime matter?
A little bit. Although we did have Monique on Facebook say that it made sense, primary matter. So
okay, Monique. Thank you so much.
Successfully.
We got some new people today.
We do. It's great to have everybody with us. Yeah, feel free to comment if anything doesn't make sense. I'm trying to watch all of the social media platforms. Yeah. There's a lot of them, so I am kind of flipping between them. But I will mention them. And
I don't think we've ever had a comment. We haven't had a comment on TikTok. Although God bless my wife, because the other day, a couple weeks ago, she was watching, and my daughter was home because she hadn't started school yet, and my wife said, "Maura, go on TikTok and make a comment."
That's so sweet.
So she was trying to get us one comment on TikTok.
We've had like a total of 74 viewers, 76 viewers, excuse me, again, but it's again that like really quick.
Yeah, right.
Coming through.
They come and go.
I did put a comment on there though to please comment where you're from, just say hi.
All right. We'd love to hear from you. All right, number 3 of the top 10 interesting questions that St. Thomas Aquinas asks about creation is
so cute.
Okay, what are those?
Are those meerkats? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
meerkats?
Aren't they so cute? See,
I love meerkats.
See, now I'm gonna challenge Sissel, because Sissel looked at that just like all of us, and our first thought is, oh, aren't they cute, right? And so that means there's a certain attraction to them. There's something that you like about them. I can't imagine anybody seeing this and being like, oh, I don't like those. They're cute. They're creatures, right? So St. Thomas Aquinas says, whether in creatures is there necessarily found a trace of the Trinity? And this is quite interesting.
I'm not going to say I would usually call the Trinity cute, but I just was reading a prayer for the Queenship of Mary yesterday.
Yeah.
And in that, it did say the most adorable Trinity.
Oh, really?
So,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, cute and adorable, because adorable has to
Adorable
do
is
with
a little bit different,
has
but
like adoration.
Yes.
You know.
However, I feel like today we
Yeah.
kind of coincide
Yeah,
cute and
yeah.
adorable. So.
I think you're right. I think, yeah, adorable has, which is an interesting, thing for sure. So, whether in creatures is necessarily found a trace of the Trinity. Now, this is interesting because, again, I think what we have largely lost in our culture these days is the ability to connect our experience with the outside world to God. And I would argue that it's hard, it's almost impossible to be unhappy if you're making these connections. I'm not saying I'm like Mr. Happiness, but I would say that I generally am a pretty happy person. And I think I attribute a lot of that to the fact that I do, kind of thanks to God's grace and my studying the Summa and reading scripture and all that, try to see kind of the big picture. I mean, that's the definition of wisdom. Wisdom is an intellectual virtue where you're able to see the big picture. And so you don't sweat the small stuff because you're seeing things from God's perspective, right? From a very a position of wisdom. And that's what wisdom is all about, not only as an intellectual virtue, but also as one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit as well.
Really quickly, I'm just catching up on some comments from Facebook. Paula said, and if we intentionally, this is going back, obviously, think back a couple minutes, but if we intentionally offer all those acts of every day, even down to our very breaths and heartbeats, we return love to the Father for all his creation. Such a beautiful way to participate in the love of the Trinity. And then Monique also said, you said it, said as well, do everything moving you towards God. And then she shared us on Facebook. So,
all right. Thank you so much, Monique. And Paula, of course, is my wonderful wife. And Paula has a great devotion to the divine will. And that's what she's referring to. The divine will, and I don't know it as nearly as well as Paula does, but it's very, very much connected. In fact, Paula says this often, that St. Thomas Aquinas, and what he, his love of the created world and its connection to God. In fact, I will say real quickly, when I teach the high school students about the Summa Theologica, for the last 10 years, I've always said there's three main themes that I want you to pick out of the Summa. And one of them is nature, because we have to understand human nature. We have to understand divine nature, the nature of things. It's very, very important to understand nature. And the second one is epistemology, and that's knowledge. Okay, well, what can we know, and why is knowledge important? Very, very, John 17:3 says, this is eternal life, to know thee, the one true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent, right? So knowledge is very, very important. The third one is teleology, and that is where things are directed towards an end. If you saw, birds flying in the sky, your mind, you'd say, well, they're going somewhere, they're doing something, or ducks flying south, or ants building mounds. Everything is geared towards an end, and we're no different. We are directed towards an end, and that's teleology. Well, this year when I teach, I am adding a fourth theme, and that theme would be immanence. And what it is God's intimate relationship with the created world and making those connections. God is transcendent. He's above us in all ways, infinitely above us, but he also is immanent in that he wants and has a very, very intimate relationship with the created world. And I think St. Thomas Aquinas is very good at that. And that was all in my way of saying that my wife has a devotion to the divine will. So anyways, but the divine will says you kind of you offer it back to God. You put your I love you on it, and then you offer it back to God. I think that's one of the big aspects of the divine will. So, and thank you for cutting in, and feel free to do that whenever somebody comments. And so we do appreciate those, that feedback very much. It makes the show much more interesting rather than me just, rambling, forever.
No one wants to hear just my questions either, my comments. I really appreciate what y'all commented too.
You have good comments. Comments. Mm-hmm. Yeah, appreciate it very much. All right, so is there a trace of the Trinity necessarily found? And the answer is yes. And Thomas makes a distinction between a trace, and I love this. He says, a trace shows that someone has passed by, but not who it is. Okay, so if you go outside, you see a mountain, you see a stream, you see a bird, do you ever say to yourself, somebody has passed by here? It's like you wake up in the middle of the night and you go into the kitchen and there's like a a plate of food or something, and you're like, somebody's passed by here. Somebody came
Dave
down
said
here.
that very much like a dad who's like, who has been up late getting a midnight snack?
Yeah, but somebody's been here, And if it was like ice cream and it was still frozen, you'd say, wow, somebody was here recently, because it's still there. Do you ever do that? Do you ever just go out?
Rookie mistake. Don't leave the ice cream out.
I got fired from Baskin Robbins one time for leaving the freezer door open and all the ice cream melted. I mean, that's a whole mea culpa.
That's true.
Not blaming Baskin Robbins. It was my fault. All right, but he says other effects represent the cause as regards the similitude of the form, and this is called an image. Okay, so big difference between an image and a trace. We are images of God because we are made to his image and likeness, and that is a huge, huge blessing. Now, there's something else I want to point out that I find it interesting, is that it's like not only are all these things in the world traces of God, but you can also identify each one of them with particular persons within the Blessed Trinity, okay? So he says, as in a created substance, it represents the cause and principle, okay? So in that manner, it shows the person of the Father, who is the principle from no principle. Okay, so the created things are effects of a principle, and so therefore it goes back and is a reflection of God the Father. According as it has form and species, it represents the Word, as the form of the thing made by art is from the conception of the craftsman, and according as it has relation of order, it represents the Holy Ghost, inasmuch as he is love, because the order of the effect to something else is from the will of the Creator. So you can actually associate all these things in the created world, not only with God in general and his essence, but also with each particular member of the Blessed Trinity. So isn't that kind of cool?
That was really cool.
So the challenge, even if some of that is like, what? Substance, effect, principle, it's all these words. The key is pay attention, because everything is related to God, right? That's why we call it a universe, because it's it's one. It's all related to each other, and everything works so beautifully and perfectly. And I would argue that the more, nothing wrong with technology. We're using technology to broadcast this show for sure. But the more we get into technology, the more our nose is in our phones, the less we're paying attention to all the other stuff that's out there. And really, I would argue that that's one of the reasons a lot of people have a lot of anxiety. They're not connecting these things. All right. So
Monique, by the way, says that she's taking notes. Our faith is so rich. So yeah. It's definitely a note-taking show.
Yeah. All right, Monique, though. Well, thanks so much. Number 4. Okay, let me go back to 4, and that is this one. Whether it's an article of faith that the world began. Okay, so
what does he mean by article? Can you explain, define the term?
Oh, yeah, sure. So an article of faith is something that we believe on faith and not through demonstration and not through reason alone. Okay, so for example, like I mentioned a moment ago, St. Thomas Aquinas says that we can know there's a God through reason alone. Okay, we don't need sacred scripture, we don't need a catechism, we don't need canon law or divine revelation to tell us that there's a God. We can just figure that out. We can know it, okay, because we can see the world and say, oh, I think there's a God that created this. But we don't know there's a Trinity through reason. We need to be, that has to be revealed to us. Nobody's going to, drop into the kind of drop into existence and say, you know what, I think there's Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in the Godhead. We learn that through the church. God teaches that to us, and then we accept it. Okay, so what he's saying here is, do we know that the world began through reason or faith? Okay, so it is an article of faith that the world began at some point. It didn't always exist. Okay, Aristotle said it always existed. The world has always existed. St. Thomas Aquinas disagrees. So can we reason that out, or do we have to believe it on faith? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So what do you think?
Do we think? What do I think that St. Thomas Aquinas said?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
And do you agree?
I probably will. Even if I don't, I should.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, hold on, let me make sure I can say this right, that he thinks that we could reason out that the world has not always existed.
Okay, you think that he thinks that we can?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm confident in Aquinas' abilities.
All right. So he would disagree with you.
Oh, well,
okay. So he says
it's a common theme on the show.
I know. Just whatever you first think, go the opposite.
Got it.
Okay. By faith alone do we hold, and by no demonstration can it be proved that the world did not always exist, as was said above of the mystery of the Trinity. The reason of this is that the newness of the world cannot be demonstrated on the part of the world itself. Okay, so we cannot prove demonstrably that the world began at some point. And then he says, for the will of God cannot be investigated by reason except as regards those things which God must will of necessity, and what he wills about creatures is not among these things. But the divine will can be manifested by revelation, on which faith rests. Okay, so he's not saying that the world didn't begin at some point. He's saying it did, but we only know this through faith and not through demonstration. We can't prove it.
I have a question.
Okay. Yeah.
Obviously, Aquinas lived much before this time. And with a lot of the science that we have nowadays, like a lot of people, like a lot of scientists would agree that the Earth kind of came into existence at some point in time, whether it be like a really, really long time ago,
right,
or, stuff like that. So going on that idea, when he talks about like, he says that, can we reason? Is that saying like, it would not include, like, okay, I'm not saying this well. Give me a second. I'm loading. I'm trying to figure out how to state
That's
this.
Okay. It's coming.
It's coming. So he's saying like, okay, back then they were not able, there was nothing demonstrated to say that like the earth was created. But now let's say that there was. Let's say there's like some scientific explanation that yes, in fact, the earth did not always exist here. Yeah. Would he then change his answer, or is it only based on things we can observe ourselves without like scientific experiments?
No, that's a good question. Okay. Yeah. I think
I got there.
Yeah. You brought that one in. No, I think you're right. I think that maybe the advance of science and the things that we know now that he didn't know might make him change his answer, that there is perhaps some demonstrable proof now that there wasn't back then. I just don't know, because I'm not a real scientific kind of guy, but
me neither. Really.
No, I actually never thought about that, but I think you're right, and there's probably a better answer to that. But I think that science has perhaps proved that the world did exist, and most scientists, even if they don't believe in God, would probably hold that, right?
I'm pretty sure. Again, I'm not really in touch with a lot of the scientific community. However, I do believe that, because when you think of things, talk about the different theories of how the world came to be, like with Big Bang Theory and things like that. There is always like that starting point. So I don't know. That was my thought.
Yeah. No.
My 2 cents. I should probably not talk about science when I don't.
That wasn't 2 cents. That was like a dime. I mean, that was. Oh, okay. Much
for
more
a second,
than 2 cents.
I wasn't thinking and computing what you were saying, and I thought you were saying I was giving less than 2 cents, and I was like, okay, all right, then I'll just stay quiet now.
trying to compliment. I'm saying that was 5 times 2 cents. Okay, number 5. Whether the multitude and distinction of things comes from God.
Yeah,
okay,
puppies.
now. Yeah, so you see there's not just puppies. There's there's a cat there, and the cat has like 2 shades of it.
What is the thing to the right of the cat?
Yeah, that's like is that like a little ferret or something?
Maybe?
Or like a, what is the thing called, a possum? Or I'm not sure what it is.
I honestly don't know, because these all look like house pets that you would have, and I don't know what that is. But that's okay.
But that's the whole point. There's a multitude and distinction of things from God. I've talked about this many times. If you're new to the program, there's like 7.8 million species of creatures in the world. It's like a whole lot of them, and it's fascinating to see and to kind of figure out, why are there so many? What's the point? Why do we need so many different kinds of creatures and so much variety, so much inequality? Well, in the Summa, St. Thomas, first of all, he gives a couple of opinions on this that he disagrees with. And he said Democritus, who interestingly was a pre-Socratic philosopher. Okay, Democritus was a philosopher before Socrates, therefore pre-Socratic, and he was called an atomist, which he believed in like he was like the first person to contribute to like the atomic theory that all things were made of little tiny and this guy lived like 500 years before Christ, and so he's still very relevant in science today, Democritus. But so Thomas refers to him and says Democritus, for instance, and all the ancient natural philosophers who admitted no cause but matter. Okay, so Democritus was a materialist. He didn't think there was anything beyond matter, attributed it to matter alone, and in their opinion, the distinction of things comes from chance according to the movement of matter. Okay, so matter just kind of moves around and it creates different things. It seems very unlikely that this will be the case. I mean, you're going to create an elephant or a giraffe or an ostrich just because matter is kind of colliding and all of a sudden, boom, a giraffe appears. But that's what these people believe. They believe it's just a collision of matter, and there have been philosophers that have believed this for a long time. So clearly, Aquinas doesn't agree with this theory. And then he also quotes a Muslim philosopher by the name of Avicenna, and he said that God, by understanding himself, produced the first intelligence, in which, forasmuch as it was not its own being, there it necessarily, a composition of potentiality and act, and so the first intelligence produced the second intelligence, and insofar as it understood itself, it created another. So Avicenna said that God creates like an angel or an intelligence, and then that thing creates something else, and then that thing creates something else. And so you have the diversity of things because everything's creating something after itself, okay? So therefore, it's taking the ultimate creation of all things away from God and putting it into like secondary creating, creatures, I guess you could say, okay? So Aquinas didn't like that explanation either. So this is what Aquinas says, and this is one of my favorite passages in the entire Summa. I think it's so beautiful, and so I'll read it nice and slowly. He says, we must say, okay, now, again, he's trying to explain why there are so many things, so many creatures in the world. Why not just 100 creatures or 1,000? Why 7.8 million different types of species of creatures. And I know you've heard this one, Sissel, so just bear with me here. He says, we must say that the distinction and multitude of things comes from the intention of the first agent, who is God. For he brought things into being in order that his goodness might be communicated to creatures and be represented by them. And because his goodness could not be adequately represented by one creature alone, he produced many and diverse creatures, that what was wanting to one in the representation of the divine goodness might be supplied by another. For goodness, which in God is simple and uniform, in creatures is manifold and divided, and hence the whole universe together participates the divine goodness more perfectly, and represents it better than any single creature, whatever. All right? So I've gotten into the habit, when you see a creature like a dragonfly or a moth or a butterfly, do you ever just stop down and just say, wow, that thing's amazing. Look at that thing. I mean, we get so used to it because we see them all the time. Or birds are flying around.
And sometimes they almost seem like a nuisance to us, and so we don't really fully appreciate it because you're just kind of like, what are you doing? You're like in the way, or a rabbit runs across the road or something. And you're like, oh gosh, and you're not you're not really on the, let me appreciate how beautiful this is.
Yeah, maybe I should have been a poet. I don't know. Maybe I took the wrong path.
Let me catch us up on a couple of comments real quick, Dave.
Okay.
Paula said, I think the multitude of species is an indication of the excess of love that exists in God that he just pours out as gifts to man, which I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, I like that.
And Monique says, God is so intentional. And then also, Monica joined us on YouTube and said, hey.
Okay. Hey, Monica. All right. So, yeah, that is so amazing and beautiful. And I do agree with Paula. I think this is a manifestation of his love. Again, if you go back to that whole, the Blessed Trinity having so much intense love that it bursts forth creation, and then and everything that you see is really a manifestation of the love of the Trinity. Okay, so to Sissel's point, we see a squirrel pass through or a bunny rabbit, and you're thinking, you just we become so jaded, we really do. I try to fight jadedness so much where we don't really notice things and we're not really paying attention, and because we see them every day, whereas I'll always, when I have my son in the car, I'll say, Patrick, what do you see that's beautiful out there? And he always, first thing he always says is trees. And I'll be okay, like, what besides trees?
Besides the trees.
I love trees.
And trees are great.
Amazing.
My sister is really good because she's that person. We always joke about, like, I don't know if you ever did this with your friends, but like if you were to, what silly reason would you find yourself getting arrested for? And we always said that Tova would get arrested for trying to take a picture of a pretty flower that was on private property and she didn't realize and just like wandered in because we'll be driving and she's driving. She'll go, can you get a picture of that tree with the leaves turning? Or can you get a picture of this sunset? I need to like look at this later. And so she really appreciates it.
That would be so funny. A year in jail, taking a picture of a beautiful flower on somebody's
yard. She just
was
appreciating the beauty.
Yeah, good for her.
Monique says that St. Ignatius helped her to find God in nature.
Oh, St. Ignatius. Which St. Ignatius, I wonder? Was it the Jesuit of Loyola, or was it St. Ignatius of Antioch? Or I'm guessing it's Loyola because I think St. Ignatius of Loyola was into that kind of beauty.
It does seem like something he would say, right?
Yeah, and of course St. Francis is known for this,
Listening for God in nature. I just did a little search, Ignatian spirituality.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for that comment. And, there have been times, like I'd admit, where I kind of like stand outside and I'm like, oh, will some bird land on my, like I want to be like St. Francis, like I mean you no harm. And, I remember we were traveling to Florida one time and I have some video to back this up somewhere, but we had like a squirrel coming up and eating out of our hand.
Really?
Yeah, it was.
That's unique.
And my only thought was like, this squirrel, somebody's going to kill this thing. I mean, I hated to think that because some people are going to be mean to something that trusts them that much, But yeah, the squirrels, and my wife can remember this, were eating out of our hand, and it was just so beautiful that they would trust us because most squirrels have no interest in doing anything like that. Okay, so that's the multitude and the distinction coming from God. And then let's go to number 6. Now, whether the inequality of things is from God. Okay, why do we have so much inequality? And I purposely put a picture of a man and a dog on there because, there's great inequality between a human being and a dog. Much more an angel and an earthworm, or a slug and a elephant. They're not equal in any way. Some creatures are faster, some are smarter, some are bigger, some are, what have you, prettier than others. Why inequality? And then let me see if anybody wants to take a guess at what St. Thomas is going to say about this. But I'll tell you, one church father by the name of Origen had a very interesting theory on this. And what he said, and it's basically heresy, okay? But and that's why Origen never got canonized, because he said a lot of crazy stuff. He had some great stuff, but he also had some crazy stuff that he said. But he believed that God created men, and then and men had free will. Okay, so he's all right so far. But the men who abused, and I say men as in men and women, but the men and women who abused their free will and sinned got demoted and became irrational creatures. Okay, squirrels and monkeys and aardvarks, all right, and dolphins. And the human beings who used their reason and their free will in honor of God got elevated to being angels. Okay, so you can imagine then, I guess, if you're like a bad squirrel, you become an earthworm, so it's always the result of how, although squirrels don't have free will, but I guess if you're a really bad human being, you become, a paramecium or something. I mean, you get really, really demoted. And what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that, as St. Thomas Aquinas points out, is that God said in Scripture that everything that he created was good, right? And the problem with that is that it would fundamentally change the way we see the world, because if that was the case, every time we saw a bird or, a squirrel or what have you, we would think, gosh, what human being messed up? Okay, so instead of seeing the beauty in all this creation, we see it as a result of sin. And you can see how fundamentally that would change things. And there's a really, really good quote from Augustine that I love. And he was responding to Origen about this. Okay, remember, anything that's created is because of some human being sinning. And Augustine said, what can be more foolish than to say that the divine architect provided this one sun for the one world, not to be an ornament to its beauty, but for the benefit of corporeal things, nor the benefit of corporeal things, but that it happened through the sin of one soul. So that if 100 souls had sinned, there would be 100 suns in the world. S-U-N, okay, suns. That's pretty funny, you know? So instead of seeing the sunrise as beautiful, you would think, wow, somebody messed up. And, that'd be horrible. So what does Aquinas say? He says, in natural things, species seem to be arranged in degrees. As the mixing things are more perfect than the elements, and plants than minerals, and animals than plants, and men than other animals, and in each of these one species is more perfect than others. Therefore, as the divine wisdom is the cause of the distinction of things for the sake of the perfection of the universe, so it is the cause of inequality. For the universe would not be perfect if only one grade of goodness were found in things. So imagine if every single person looked exactly the same, everybody was exactly the same intelligence, everybody was exactly the same height, everybody was equally beautiful. What a boring world that would be. There'd be no comparison. There'd be nothing better than others. You wouldn't have anything better because there's no there's nothing to compare it to. You wouldn't have a great friend because that your friend would be no better than the lousy friend you used to have. Nothing would be beautiful because nothing's ugly. And
what a stale life.
You would never have a good day or a beautiful day of weather. I say all the time, I think my family gets sick of me saying this, is that I love Texas summers. Okay, I love a few days.
You and two other people, Dave.
Yeah, right. I love the other day when it was 107 degrees because it was so hot that I was thinking, I can't wait till a month and a half from now when the high is 83 and there's a cool breeze in the morning because I have something to compare it to. Because if I didn't have this lousy day of sweltering heat, I'm never going to appreciate that beautiful day in fall. That's why fall is my favorite season, is that you've gotten through the summer and all of a sudden the weather starts getting better and you have something to compare it to. You know, people who live in like Los Angeles where it's like 90% of the year it's sunny and 82, I wouldn't want that because there aren't any seasons. There's nothing to compare it to, you know? All right.
That's true.
Any comments?
Very
Anybody?
true. Let me see. Let me check. We'll check again. Make sure I haven't missed anybody. I don't think so. I think we're all caught up.
All right. Everybody has. Okay. So number 7, is there only one world? Isn't this interesting? Okay. You think there's? Do you think there could be more worlds out there?
I don't know if I personally believe or / put that much energy into thinking about it, to be honest.
Aquinas did.
Of course he did. However, I do believe it was my understanding that, like, from the Catholic Church, that there could theoretically, like, they don't close off the idea that there is no other world, there are no other creatures outside of, like, what we know. But they're also like that they're not. It would be very complicated and interesting if that was the case.
I guess you also have to define world because our world, does that mean like all the planets or does that mean just the Earth?
Are we also including like heaven and hell?
Yeah,
because that's like are those considered different worlds? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're right. I mean, it's if something else, we found some other planet that had, other creatures on it. Could you still say, well, that's all one world? I mean, it's all one thing. And I think that's kind of what Thomas is getting at.
Gotcha.
He says the very order of things created by God shows the unity of the world. For this world is called one by the order of unity, whereby some things are ordered to others. But whatever things come from God have a relation to order to each other as to God himself. It must be that all things should belong to one world, therefore those things can assert that many worlds exist. Therefore, those only can assert that many worlds exist who do not acknowledge any ordaining wisdom. So he's saying that everything has to be ordered to one. Everything, even if there are, as Cicero alluded to, if we find some other creatures out there that we didn't know about, it's still going to be inside the providence of God. They're still going to be ordered to God. and created by God. And that's what I think he said that we have to believe in. All right. Next one's going to...
By the way, Paula says that she thinks there might be other worlds out there.
Oh, okay. Okay. But does she agree that it would all have to be still ordained to
Well, I was gonna,
God, right?
and again, yeah, I think it would just, I think the most fascinating thing is if we did find another world and other, creatures of some sort would be what they've been taught about salvation, like that kind of, like what do they know, and then how does it all fit together in God's plan? I'd assume that God would have an overarching plan, and that there was some, like the uniformity. It all comes down to his will.
I've always thought if God created two worlds, like two, let's say, Earths, and put two people on them, like Adam and Eve, but in the other world it was, Jill and Hank or whatever, but then and let them just kind of develop, organically, and how would they be different after 100,000 years or whatever? Would they kind of develop the same and create the same kind of things? Or
what if the other ones didn't fall though?
Yeah.
What if they weren't tempted?
Then everything would be...
It would be completely different.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like what would it look like?
Right.
Because there wouldn't be a fall, but I don't think there would be as much capacity for love. Or maybe there'd be greater love, but,
With the original holiness.
That's
a whole other episode, guys.
Yeah, that's very thought-provoking. That's very interesting. So, okay, so...
apparently I do think about it more than I thought.
All right, number 8 is evil a nature. Okay, what is
sketchy hoodie?
I know. That is so creepy. I'll tell you what, I have got to say the St. Michael, the Archangel prayer, because I was doing a number of videos about evil and sin and stuff like that. And when you go on these platforms for pictures and you put in something like evil, you get some images that you don't want to see. I mean, they're creepy. And so this is one of the more benign ones that you kind of have to use your imagination. It's kind of creepy, but it's not like evil. In fact, there's kind of a funny one that I'll show you here in a couple of questions from now, that I was trying to find the most benign evil thing in the world, and I think you'll find it pretty humorous. Okay, don't go ahead, but okay, is evil in nature? And you may have heard this before. This is kind of interesting. St. Thomas says, one opposite is known through the other, as darkness is known through light. Hence, also, what evil is must be known from the nature of good. Now, we have said above that good is everything appetible, desirable. And thus, since every nature desires its own being and its own perfection, it must be said also that the being and the perfection of any nature is good. Okay, so that's very classic Aquinas optimism. Hence, it cannot be that evil signifies being or any form or nature. Therefore, it must be that by the name of evil is signified the absence of good. So, again, classic Aquinas optimism. Everything is good. You look out your window and you see birds and cars and trees and the sun and wind and leaves, and it's all good. Okay, it's all good. And so the only evil is the absence of good, right?
So he's saying basically there is not an evil nature.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. There's no evil nature. It's not a thing. It's only an absence of a thing.
It's always so funny because I feel like when people think about Aquinas, they think of him as being very intense, very serious. And I mean, not that he wasn't intense and serious, but like when he said with this optimism that he does have, I think is funny because it seems counter to what I think a lot of people picture Aquinas to be, that he's very much like, this is what's wrong with everything and this is what we need to be doing. But he's like, he goes, this is a great, guys. There's no bad.
I think he would have, been a very joyful soul. And one of my mentors, Father Edwin Robinson, is this old Dominican priest that I used to go and visit with many years ago. And he was in his 90s at the time, and he lived at the Dominican Priory. And I learned a lot from him. And I used to go, and this was probably at least 20 years ago. And I would go in, and the first thing he would always say to me was, he would say, David, did you see the trees outside? Did you see the roadrunner that crossed the road? Did you see? He would always ask me about something in nature. Did you notice that? And I don't think he was just, like quizzing me or trying to make a point. But I think that's the way he thought. And he was a very peaceful man. In fact, the award that they give every year at the
Catholic
CPLC,
Foundation,
right? That's named.
CPLC or the Catholic?
The Catholic Pro-Life Community.
Oh, sorry, I
CPLC,
got confused. My bad.
Yeah, they call it the Edward Robinson Award.
Right.
Because, like last year, I won that, and it was named after my friend, Father Edward Robinson. And so it's quite an honor to do that. Okay, so number 9, is the supreme good God the cause of evil? Okay, and so, but basically, and this is the question that I asked Sisso at the beginning of the show, and it basically, Thomas says yes, in a sense. Okay, so imagine like a lion chasing after a gazelle and then capturing it, tearing it to pieces, and eating it. When you look at it, you're like, ugh, gosh, that's, or there's always that kind of stuff going on. People falling into sin, getting punished, people going to hell. So crimes and all that kind of stuff. And you'd have to say, well, how did that happen? I mean, God at least allows it, right? God either allows it or causes it. So in a sense, God is the cause of evil only in the sense, as Thomas explains, and let me see if I can find this. He says, the evil which consists in the corruption of some things is reduced to God as the cause, and this appears as regards both natural things and voluntary things. Okay, it is manifest that the form which God chiefly intends in things created is the good and the order of the universe. Now, the order of the universe requires that there should be some things that can and sometimes do fail. And thus God, by causing in things the good and the order of the universe, consequently, and as it were by accident, causes the corruption of things. And this is very practical because St. Thomas gives the example of like a fire that burns a poor man's house down. And you'd have to say, well, that fire is evil. But he says, no, it's not evil because it's in the big picture, there was some reason that why God allowed that. Some good is going to come out of that eventually, right? Last weekend when we were at the Fullness of Truth conference, and Dan and Stephanie Burke were and probably the biggest takeaway I had other than my encounter with Jesus in adoration, Dan and Stephanie Burke said that if you can understand that God either causes or allows everything, it fundamentally changes your whole worldview, because everything that happens, if you get into a car accident, if you lose your job, if you're diagnosed with a disease, and you say, well, God either caused or allowed this to happen, then you realize that in the big picture, there's something good that's going to result from this. And imagine getting that into your mindset, that you realize that because God allowed it to happen, there's some good ultimately that's going to come from this. You'd never have a bad day. I mean, it's just like, what could possibly bother you? And so that's really what he's getting at. And finally, because we're running out of time, look at this picture. Is that not the goofiest evil thing you've ever seen in your life? I was trying to find, something evil, but not evil.
You know what this is giving? This is reminding me of there's this book with Sesame Street character Oscar. No, not Oscar. No. One of the monster characters, and it's called "There's a Monster" at the end of this book, and the guy's freaking out. He's like, "Oh no, I don't want to please don't keep turning the page." And then when he gets to the last page, he realizes that he's the monster. He's like this cute little fluffy monster. And he's like, "I'm not scary." That's what that reminded me of. Sorry.
Yeah, because
random aside.
I was like, there's kind of an evil about it, but it's in a very kind of goofy way. So, okay, is there one supreme evil which is the cause of every evil? This is the last question we'll have. And he says, it appears from what proceeds that there is not one first principle of evil as there is one principle of good. Now, there's a couple of things that he says, but for the sake of time, I want to read this one paragraph, which I think is really interesting. He says, the first principle of good is the highest and perfect good, which pre-contains in itself all goodness. Okay, so God pre-contains in himself everything that's good. All right, that's really interesting. But there cannot be a supreme evil because although evil always lessens good, it never wholly consumes it. And thus, while good ever remains, nothing can be wholly and perfectly bad. Now this is, okay, I'm going to leave you with this one because this is really interesting. Therefore, the philosopher Aristotle says, if the wholly evil could be, now holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y, holy, like entirely evil could be, it would destroy itself, because all good being destroyed which it need be for something to be wholly evil, evil itself would be taken away since its subject is good. Okay, did you follow that?
I followed it about 20%.
Okay, well, that's better than nothing. Okay, since evil is an absence of the good, evil can only exist in the presence of good because it's the negation of good. So it's dependent upon good. So what he's saying is that if evil were to completely eradicate good, it would not have the good by which it exists, and therefore it would disappear. Okay. Sorry. I don't know. I think that's so interesting. Okay. It'd like consume itself, and it wouldn't be okay. All right. Let's leave on that high note, okay? I mean, believe me, okay. Think about that one for the next week. Do we have a show next Friday?
We should, yeah. Next Friday,
I think so.
the following Friday.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think
I'm trying to remember
the Share-a-thon's 3 weeks from this week. So 3 weeks from today, we'll be on Share-a-thon.
Perfect.
So that means we'll have 2 more shows.
2 more shows, little break.
Okay.
I'm back.
So everybody, okay, your homework is think about that last thing I just said and kind of let it kind of percolate in your brain for a little while, okay, about the whole relationship between good and evil. And okay, I'm not going to go through it again, but rewind the tape and listen to that because that's really actually quite beautiful when you think about it. Okay.
You know what I think we should do? I think we should go, like, at the end of our shows, we should do a recap, especially when you're doing these 10 lists, and go through every question, and you just say yes, no, maybe, sort of. And that's the recap. We post it on the short, like, on TikTok, and be like, if you want the full answers, go to...
All the TikTok people are like, man, I just want a quick answer. Okay? That would be kind of fun.
That would be funny.
We'll do that.
We'll have to do that sometime. Real quick, Dave, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
This is probably going off a little bit, but I was just thinking about this because I am helping with a retreat that the patron of the retreat is St. Edith Stein or St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross.
Yeah.
And she was a big philosopher
lady.
And I was wondering, because I really don't understand phenomenology. Is that something that we could talk about in the future? Obviously, it's not Aquinas, but she was kind of a Thomist. She really liked Aquinas.
Well, phenomenology, the kind of the founder of phenomenology was a guy named Edmund Husserl, who was the teacher of Martin Heidegger, which is an interesting relationship between those two because Husserl was Jewish and Heidegger became a Nazi. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. And also John Paul II considered himself a phenomenologist, and he also was greatly influenced by Edmund Husserl. And so, I would love to do that. And I don't honestly know a whole lot about Edith Stein, Sister Benedicta of the Cross, right?
Sister Benedicta
and
of the Cross.
I know that I think she's way understudied because many people say she's so brilliant she could be a doctor of the church one day.
Easily,
I think John Paul II will probably be a doctor of the church one day. I'm surprised that hasn't already kind of started, but I think they want to be patient with it. But no, I'd love to do phenomenology. In fact, haven't we done that one time before?
We may have touched on it a little bit, but since now that I'm learning more about it, I have a better idea.
That'd be super. Let's do that sometime. Anyways, that'll do it for this edition of Back to the Father. Thank you very much for everybody who watched. And if you're watching this on a recorded basis and you would like to get on our email list, I send out every Friday the topic and a reminder to tune in. Just email us backtothefather@grnonline.com. Thanks for watching. God bless you and have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.